I want you to close your eyes for a second and just picture a professional kitchen.
Oh boy.
Right. Not just your average neighborhood diner, but like a high-stakes, intense, elite culinary environment.
The really stressful ones.
Exactly. The kind run by an executive chef like Gordon Ramsay. You can almost feel the ambient heat radiating off the stoves, you know? You can hear the order tickets printing out nonstop.
Just that constant buzzing sound.
Yeah, that buzzing and the aggressive clash of heavy stainless steel pans, the frantic but choreographed movement of 20 cooks.
It's like a chaotic dance.
It really is. It is an environment demanding absolute precision to get 100 complex dishes out to the dining room perfectly on time. I mean, the survival rules in that space are brutal, unforgiving, and incredibly effective.
They have to be.
Right. Now, I want you to open your eyes and imagine taking those exact same elite survival rules and applying them to a teenager's student boarding house.
I mean, it sounds like an absolute recipe for disaster at first glance. We immediately picture like a red-faced executive chef throwing a plate of undercooked pasta across a dormitory common room.
Right.
Or screaming at a 15-year-old over a poorly folded fitted sheet.
It sounds utterly terrifying and, frankly, a little absurd. But that contrast is exactly what we are jumping into today. The mission of this deep dive is to explore a surprisingly brilliant piece of source material we've been looking at.
It really is a fascinating document.
It is. It's simply titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Gordon Ramsay. Because when you strip away the reality television drama and the theatrical yelling, you are actually left with something profound.
Yeah, the core architecture of it.
Exactly. We are going to look at how the core principles of high standards, strict discipline, and constructive accountability from the world's most elite culinary environments actually translate into essential everyday life skills for students living alongside others.
Yeah, and setting the foundational context here is vital before we look at the daily routines. Because this document isn't advocating for hostility.
Right, no one's throwing pans.
Exactly. And it certainly isn't about demanding Michelin star perfection from a high schooler. It is deeply focused on the underlying architecture of a high-performing environment.
Which is such a cool way to frame it.
It is. And as we work through these concepts, I want you, the listener, to think actively about your own shared spaces.
Yeah, your office, your home, your community.
Right. Knowledge only really matters when we apply it to our own lives. How do the spaces you inhabit function on a daily basis? Do the rules of those spaces elevate the people inside them, or do they drag everyone down into chaos?
Oh, that's a great question.
The source material makes a highly compelling case that the dynamics of an elite kitchen can teach us an incredible amount about our own daily habits.
Like personal responsibility.
Yeah, and how we interact with the people around us.
It is a genuinely fascinating comparison once you get past the initial shock of it. But before we can even look at the daily routines of a boarding house, the curfews, the chore wheels, the study halls, we first have to understand the psychological mindset that governs the whole system.
The foundation of it all.
Right. And according to the text, that mindset is built entirely around the paradox of high expectations.
Which sounds intense.
It does. Elite environments, whether it is a 3-star restaurant in Paris or a successful student boarding house, they share one universal trait. They expect the individuals within them to give their absolute best effort consistently.
Consistently being the operative word there. That changes the entire equation.
Right. It's not just a one-off thing.
Exactly. It is not about a sporadic, frantic burst of energy when a teacher or a head chef happens to be looking over your shoulder.
Or when grades are due.
Right. It is about an ingrained baseline expectation of effort that exists even when the room is entirely empty.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if I am putting myself in the shoes of a student, or even just remembering what it was like to be a teenager...
Oh, the horror.
Yeah, seriously. Doesn't slapping Gordon Ramsay-level high standards on a young person just create an overwhelming pressure cooker?
That's a fair point.
How is that actually healthy for a learner whose brain is still developing? I mean, if the standard is always elite and the bar is set to the absolute ceiling, aren't we just setting these students up to suffer massive anxiety?
To just totally burn out before they even graduate?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is the natural fear, and it's a valid one. However, the source material makes a critical distinction between blind, crushing pressure and what we might call developmental expectations.
Developmental expectations.
Okay. High expectations are not about manufacturing stress just for the sake of being tough.
Right.
In a healthy, high-performing environment, those expectations are entirely about helping individuals discover and reach their full potential.
So it's not about being flawless.
Exactly. It is the crucial difference between demanding that someone be utterly flawless, which is impossible, versus expecting someone to put in their absolute best, focused effort.
Yeah, and the text actually gives us some very grounded, practical examples of what these high standards look like, translated into boarding life.
What do those look like?
Well, we aren't talking about perfectly searing a scallop or executing a flawless beef Wellington.
My goodness.
Right. We are talking about the fundamentals, like completing a designated prep or study time with actual undivided focus instead of scrolling on a phone.
Ah, the phone scrolling, the ultimate enemy.
The ultimate enemy. And keeping personal spaces and shared bathrooms organized, managing a daily schedule responsibly.
Just the basics.
Yeah, and contributing a positive attitude to the boarding community rather than draining the energy of the room. It is the daily, unglamorous grind of just being a responsible human being.
And the ultimate result of meeting those seemingly mundane, everyday expectations is actually profound. The text notes that students who learn to meet these standards consistently develop deep self-discipline.
And confidence, right?
Genuine confidence.
Yeah.
Think about the psychology behind that. When the bar is high, but the expectations are explicitly clear and attainable through effort.
And you actually reach that bar day after day.
Yes. The confidence you build isn't fragile, it's earned.
That makes total sense.
I would ask you, the listener, to reflect on a time in your own life when you were held to a truly high standard.
Maybe by a boss or a mentor.
Exactly. A demanding teacher, a tough but fair boss, or a mentor who just refused to let you phone it in.
Hmm.
When you finally met that standard, did you feel crushed by the weight of it? Or did you feel a massive surge of confidence because you suddenly realized what your actual limits were?
Oh, you feel unstoppable.
Totally.
Because you've proven to yourself, not just to the person grading you, that you can operate at a significantly higher level than you thought possible.
You've expanded your capacity.
Yeah, but that introduces a massive logistical problem.
Oh.
Right? We can establish that high expectations are a good thing, but how on earth is a student supposed to maintain that level of output without hitting a wall?
A burnout factor.
Exactly. It is physically and mentally exhausting to just try hard all the time. If a student is relying purely on motivation to keep their room clean, finish their homework, and be a great roommate,
They're doomed.
they are going to run completely out of gas by Tuesday afternoon.
What's fascinating here is the counterintuitive answer the source provides. The solution to burnout isn't finding more motivation.
Like watching a hype video on YouTube.
Right. No hype videos noted. And it isn't lowering the standards either. The solution is strict discipline.
Discipline. Okay.
Gordon Ramsay frequently emphasizes in his teachings that strong routines and meticulous preparation are what actually allow culinary teams to perform effectively under crushing pressure.
Because it's not just raw talent.
Not at all. It isn't raw, innate talent that gets a kitchen through a chaotic Saturday night dinner rush. It is the fact that every single process, from chopping herbs to plating the food, has been deeply systematized.
Systematized, yeah. And the text draws a direct, brilliant line between that intense kitchen preparation and how daily discipline helps boarders feel far more in control of their own lives.
It gives them a framework.
Exactly. It lists actionable steps like following highly structured evening routines, packing bags, and preparing for the next day's lessons in advance.
Which sounds so basic, but it's huge.
It really is. Developing rigid sleep and well-being habits and taking ultimate responsibility for personal belongings. I mean, it sounds restrictive at first, but the document argues the exact opposite.
Yeah, we have to look at the why behind that argument, specifically through the lens of cognitive load.
Oh, I love the concept of cognitive load.
It's so important here. Why does a structured, rigid evening routine make a teenager feel more in control of a chaotic school day? Because relying on ingrained habits rather than sheer willpower drastically reduces the burden on the brain.
Right, because willpower is finite.
Exactly. Willpower and decision-making are finite resources. Every time we make a choice, we burn a little bit of cognitive fuel.
So true.
If a student has to wake up every single morning and expend mental energy figuring out where their math textbook is.
Oh man, or what uniform they're supposed to wear.
Right, and when they have time to grab breakfast, they are exhausted before the first bell even rings.
They've made 20 decisions before 8 a.m.
Exactly. By the time they actually sit down in a classroom to learn something difficult, their mental gas tank is completely empty.
That makes so much sense, and it makes me think of the ultimate professional kitchen analogy. Mise en place.
Ah, yes. The golden rule.
The golden rule. For anyone unfamiliar, it's a foundational French culinary phrase that translates to everything in its place.
Right.
A professional chef never, ever starts cooking a dish until every onion is finely chopped, every sauce is prepped and reduced.
Every pair of tongs is exactly where it needs to be.
Exactly, right on the station. Applying that to a boarding student is such a perfect parallel. Packing your heavy backpack the night before, laying out your school uniform.
Setting a strict non-negotiable lights-out time to protect your sleep.
Yes, that is the academic version of mise en place. If you aren't frantically scrambling to find your laptop charger or desperately trying to fight off sleep deprivation during a morning lecture.
Your brain is suddenly free.
Exactly. It's free to actually engage with the world around you.
And the text states it unequivocally. When routines become automatic habits, students experience significantly less stress and far greater independence.
Which is what every teenager wants anyway, independence.
Exactly. The structure of the boarding house doesn't trap them, it liberates them. It frees up their cognitive bandwidth to focus on the things that actually matter.
Like complex learning.
Yes, and building deep friendships and developing new skills. It is a profound psychological shift for a young person to finally realize that rules and routines aren't arbitrary punishments designed by adults.
Right, they're not just trying to ruin your life.
No, they're actually shields designed to protect their time and their energy.
That is such a good way to look at it. But even with the most flawless mise en place, reality is going to intervene.
Always does.
Mistakes are entirely inevitable. A student is going to oversleep eventually. They're going to bomb a critical history test. They're going to leave a wet towel in the middle of the shared bathroom floor.
The dreaded wet towel.
It's bound to happen. So how a community handles those inevitable failures is the next critical link in the chain that the document explores. We have to move from the theory of individual preparation to the messy reality of course correction.
Yeah, and in any high-performing environment, course correction requires immediate, clear feedback.
Clear being the key word.
Exactly. Constructive feedback is highlighted throughout the text as the vital engine of growth. It is the only mechanism that helps individuals understand what they are doing well and, crucially, what they are failing at.
Right.
In a professional kitchen, that feedback loop is instantaneous and often brutal. A plate reaches the pass, and the executive chef inspects it. The fish is either cooked perfectly or it is raw.
There is no gray area.
None. And the cook is told immediately.
Well, in a boarding house, that feedback loop obviously has to look different than a chef screaming about raw base.
You would hope so.
Right. The source document says it looks like boarding staff actively guiding students on their organization or their behavior, peers respectfully supporting one another to maintain the rules.
And students learning to reflect on their own mistakes without a crippling fear of judgment.
So what does this all mean for the actual teenager on the receiving end of that correction? Because stripping away the fear of judgment is incredibly difficult.
It's so hard.
Teenagers, and frankly, most adults in the corporate world, are practically wired to take criticism deeply personally.
Oh, totally.
If you tell a 15-year-old their room is a disaster, their first instinct is to feel attacked. How do you create an ecosystem where feedback isn't immediately perceived as a threat?
This raises an important question about the specific mechanism of constructive accountability.
Okay,
To understand how boarding staff pull this off, let's go back to the kitchen metaphor.
let's do it.
When an executive chef sends a dish back to the line because a piece of salmon is overcooked, the feedback is entirely objective. The criticism is about the temperature of the salmon.
Right, the physical piece of fish.
Exactly. It is not an indictment of the moral character, the intelligence, or the worth of the line cook who prepared it. The shared overriding goal is simply to get excellent food out to the dining room.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. The text emphasizes that effective boarding staff and mature peers use feedback in that exact same objective way. It is framed as a necessary tool for the ecosystem to function, not as a weapon to tear someone down.
Wow, that distinction is subtle but massive. It's
Yeah.
the difference between a staff member saying, you are a lazy, messy, irresponsible person,
No charts.
right? Versus saying, your muddy rugby boots are in the middle of the shared hallway, and that creates a tripping hazard that disrupts the house routine.
Exactly. One attacks the identity.
And the other addresses the physical reality of the environment.
And when feedback is consistently modeled and reframed in that objective way, as a tool for collective improvement rather than a personal attack, you begin to cultivate what the text calls a true growth mindset.
Which is the holy grail of education right now.
It is. Learning to accept advice and correction without instantly throwing up defensive walls is a lifelong process. The source explicitly notes that improvement is a journey.
Yeah.
Students who learn to absorb feedback, process it objectively, and respond positively develop immense internal resilience and emotional maturity.
Because they aren't taking everything personally.
Exactly. They stop wasting their finite energy defending their egos, and they start using that energy to rapidly adapt and improve their circumstances.
Which brings us to how all these pieces fit together. Because all of these individual traits we've been unpacking, internalizing a high standard of effort, practicing strict daily discipline to lower cognitive load, and learning to accept objective feedback without crumbling.
They don't just exist in a vacuum.
Right. They don't exist just for the benefit of one person. Ultimately, they serve a much greater, more complex purpose: the health of the community itself. We are looking at the delicate ecosystem of shared spaces.
The document draws a beautiful, vital parallel here. Professional kitchens rely entirely on seamless teamwork, immaculate cleanliness, and deep mutual respect between stations.
Right, because everything is connected.
Exactly. If the grill station is a chaotic disaster, the sauté station cannot plate their food and the entire dinner service fails. The success of the individual is entirely dependent on the state of the shared environment.
And boarding houses function under the exact same unyielding logic.
Exactly the same.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, especially when we visualize the space. Imagine a communal boarding area, say the main common room where 30 students hang out, watch television, and study together.
A lot of energy in that room.
A ton of energy. If one student decides to leave a massive mess behind, like empty snack wrappers on the sofa, textbooks thrown across the rug, dirty mugs left on the coffee table.
We've all seen that room.
We have. It is the exact functional equivalent of a line cook leaving dirty, grease-filled pans on a fellow chef station right in the middle of a Friday night dinner rush.
It's so disrespectful.
It is. It isn't just a minor annoyance or a bit of harmless clutter. It is a fundamental disrespect for the shared mission of that space.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, caring for a shared space is the ultimate physical manifestation of mutual respect.
Oh, wow.
The source details how students actively contribute to a positive functional environment by taking meticulous care of communal areas, actively supporting the established house routines,
Being considerate.
showing quiet consideration for others who might be studying or sleeping, and deeply understanding that shared living requires active cooperation.
Because you're not the only one there.
Right.
Yeah.
You simply cannot maintain a high-performing, low-stress environment if the physical space itself is treated with disdain. If one person ignores a mess, the whole system begins to degrade.
Like the broken window theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a kitchen, you don't ignore a grease fire just because it isn't your station.
Right.
In a boarding house, you don't step over a piece of trash just because you didn't drop it.
There is a specific line in the text that really struck me regarding this exact dynamic. Pride in the environment often reflects pride in oneself.
That is such a powerful line.
It is such a powerful, observable psychological insight. If your shared living environment is constantly chaotic, dirty, and disorganized, it reflects a collective mindset that lacks discipline and self-respect.
It drags everyone's baseline down.
It totally does. But when you walk into a shared space that is clean, orderly, and clearly cared for by the people who use it, you instantly feel a sense of calm and pride. You subconsciously stand a little taller.
You behave a little better.
You do.
Because you know you actively contributed to that order. You belong to a community that values itself enough to fiercely maintain its standards.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the crucial why this matters section of the document, which ties all these concepts together. When you combine clearly communicated fair expectations with the kind of constructive, objective accountability we discussed.
You don't just get a boot camp.
Right. You do not get a dystopian, stress-filled, authoritarian boot camp. You get the exact opposite result. You create a culture where students feel remarkably safe, deeply supported, and highly motivated to succeed.
Which naturally leads to very tangible, real-world benefits for the students. The source lists them out clearly. Vastly better study habits because the environment is conducive to focus.
Right.
Stronger personal independence because they aren't relying on adults to manage their time. greatly improved mental well-being due to lower daily stress.
The cognitive load is handled.
Exactly. And most importantly, a much greater readiness for life beyond the school gates. Because let's face it, adult life is just one giant, complicated, shared environment.
Unfortunately, yes.
Whether you are navigating corporate politics in an open-plan office, managing chores in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, or eventually running a busy family home,
The rules don't change.
they don't. The fundamental rules of cooperation, discipline, and shared respect do not disappear when you graduate. They just get significantly more complex and the stakes get much higher.
The text provides a final anchoring thought for boarders that I think is essential to highlight, especially regarding the pressure of those stakes. It reminds the reader that standards are absolutely not about achieving perfection.
That's a relief.
Right. Gordon Ramsay might strive for a geometrically perfect beef Wellington on camera, but in the reality of daily life, perfection is a toxic myth.
Yeah, nobody is perfect.
Standards are about the consistency of your effort, the depth of your respect for others, and your willingness to take full responsibility for your specific role within a community.
Those are tangible skills.
And like any physical skills, whether it is perfectly chopping a mountain of onions or managing the complex personalities of a kitchen brigade, they can only be learned through relentless daily practice.
Boarding life, for all its challenges, offers those thousands of daily micro-opportunities to practice those habits, to inevitably make mistakes, to receive objective feedback, and to grow vastly stronger because of the process.
It's a laboratory for life.
It really is. It is a remarkable way to view what could otherwise just be seen as the boring, repetitive chores of daily student life. It elevates the mundane act of making a bed or clearing a plate into something incredibly developmental and profound.
It shifts the entire internal narrative. The perspective moves from the resentful thought of, I have to do this because an adult told me to.
Which we've all felt.
We've all been there. To the empowering realization of, doing this builds the structural foundation for the capable adult I am becoming. It's a completely transformative way to look at discipline and structure.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, to wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that builds on everything we've unpacked from this fascinating document.
Let's hear it.
The source explains so beautifully how the rigid structure of boarding life, the high standards, the daily discipline, the constant feedback loops, prepares students for the real world and the complexities of living with others. But what happens when we take the inevitable next step in adulthood?
The solo step.
Right. Think about a time in the future when you eventually move out and live entirely alone. Stripped of your roommates, stripped of the boarding staff guiding your schedule, with absolutely no kitchen brigade surrounding you to point out your mistakes.
Nobody there to send the dish back.
Exactly. When there is no one left to hold you accountable to the shared space. Do you have the internal resilience to become your own Gordon Ramsay and maintain your highest standards when no one else is watching? Thank you so much for joining us on today's deep dive. We hope it gave you some fascinating food for thought on how you manage your own spaces, your daily routines, and your personal standards. Until next time.